by the year 2024. Obviously, that deadline is still 6 years away, and only a handful of those countries have reached that goal thus far. But in each of the last 4 years, the vast majority of European nations in the alliance have increased their defense spending as a percentage of GDP. The combined increase is more than $87 billion in defense spending. The trend is positive, just as President Trump has been demanding. They spend more than Russia. They spend more than China. They've pledged to spend more. They are not freeloaders. But just today, President Trump asked for more. He said he wants not the 2%, but to double that to 4% of GDP for every single nation. Even America doesn't spend that much now. And we already have the world's largest and most powerful military anywhere on the planet ever. Today, President Trump lashed out at NATO nations that are buying oil and gas from Russia, in particular, Germany.
We're supposed to protect you against Russia, but they're paying billions of dollars to Russia. But Germany is totally controlled by Russia. Now, if you look at it, Germany is a captive of Russia because they supply. They got rid of their coal plants. They got rid of their nuclear. They're getting so much of the oil and gas from Russia.
Germany is a captive of Russia. Germany is one of our closest allies. After the attacks of 9/11, we called on Germany's leadership to send troops to fight with us in Afghanistan. They answered. They have fought alongside American troops there for 17 years. When our soldiers and airmen are maimed and mauled in combat, they are regularly flown to Landstuhl Medical Center in Germany. They get critical care there, have limbs amputated there. The headquarters of the United States Air Force in Europe is at Ramstein Air Base in Germany. Our 86th Airlift Wing is there. Our 435th Air Ground Operations Wing is there. Our new 515th Air Mobility Operations Wing is there. In 2015, for our drone war in Pakistan, Yemen, Afghanistan, and Somalia, an important control center is reported to have been housed there. The Germans provide space and money for our operations in Europe, the Middle East, and beyond, not solely for the protection of Germany, but also so that we can further our objectives and protect our people all around the world. The Germans are our close friends and treasured allies. The President's attack on our NATO friends is drawing concern from quarters around this globe, including from both sides of the political aisle here at home. Remember, NATO nations replaced U.S. troops as leaders of operations in Kosovo and Bosnia. They are partners in our engagements with the Islamic State and terrorists in West Africa. I spoke today with Nicholas Burns. He was our ambassador to NATO under President George Bush the 43rd when the terrorists struck us on 9/11. He aired his concerns this morning on MSNBC.
It's just infuriating to watch this happen. You cannot imagine any American president all the way back 75 years deciding to become the critic-in-chief of NATO. I mean, it's Orwellian. He's making our friends out to be our enemies, and he's treating our enemies like Putin as our friends.
Our friends as enemies, our enemies as friends. Of course, President Putin is meeting with President Trump just days from now in Helsinki. President Trump's aides tell us they will have a one-on-one sit-down, which means no advisors, no transcribers, no reporters, only translators. Will President Trump tell Putin that sanctions will not go away until he withdraws from Crimea? Will President Trump stand up to Russian meddling? Will President Trump stand with Britain in the face of murders in their countries by Russian nerve agents? We, the public, may never know exactly what is said. But one thing is certain. The former KGB agent Vladimir Putin, who invaded Ukraine and annexed Crimea, who interfered in our 2016 election and is attempting to interfere now in the vote this November, who murders his enemies and the journalists who expose his activities, Vladimir Putin would like nothing more than for our NATO alliance to fray, for friends to fight among themselves, as we do today, in historically unprecedented fashion. For it is NATO that is the best defense against Vladimir Putin and Russian aggression. The NATO we created largely in our own self-interest so that the United States could trade our goods and spread our values around the world while keeping murderous rulers like Vladimir Putin in check. The same Vladimir Putin who President Trump says is fine as he publicly attacks our friends. Never before in history. Our chief White House correspondent, John Roberts, is live in Brussels. John?
Shep, good afternoon to you. A lot to unpack there, so let's begin. President Trump, when he made his NATO debut here in Brussels last year, and we were here for that meeting, came to shake things up. Today he brought with him a rhetorical herd of elephants to stampede some of our allies because the president sees a double standard here. As you pointed out, NATO was created in part to protect Europe against then the Soviet Union, with Russia at its core. Now the president says countries like Germany are buying a lot of gas and oil and other energy from Russia at the same time that the United States is paying the lion's share of the bill to NATO in order to protect countries like Germany from Russia. The president's statements this morning over breakfast got him into a rather spirited back and forth with the NATO Secretary General, Jens Stoltenberg. Listen here.
I think that 2 world wars and the Cold War taught us that we are stronger together than apart.
But how can you be together when a country is getting its energy from the person you want protection against or from the group that you want protection?
Because we understand that when we stand together, also when dealing with Russia, we are stronger. I think what we have seen is that...
No, you're just making Russia richer. Well, you're not dealing with Russia, you're making Russia richer.
A little while after that, the president had a bilateral meeting with the Chancellor of Germany, Angela Merkel. The president says that they did talk about the pipeline issue, and this is the Nord Stream 1 and 2 pipelines that would pipe natural gas directly from Russia to Germany. The president did not say what that discussion was about, but he did say that the talks that the two of them had were quite cordial. Listen to what the president said. Oh, I'm sorry. We've been playing that all day today. But we should say, though, that Merkel did have something to say before the sit-down with President Trump. She said, "We conduct sovereign policy and make sovereign decisions." Clearly, Shep, the president would like it better if Germany would buy some of that liquefied natural gas that the United States started exporting not too long ago, as opposed to buying it from Vladimir Putin. Shep?
What of the fears among our allies that the president is effectively weakening this NATO alliance?
Yeah, there has been a lot of fears, particularly among the president's critics, that he wants to undermine NATO, particularly going into his meeting with Vladimir Putin. You suggested Putin would like nothing more than a NATO that was certainly stressed. But in this declaration, which will precede the official communique to come out tomorrow, there's very strong language supporting NATO. There's also strong language standing up to Vladimir Putin, and then strong language as well regarding increasing NATO members' financial commitment to the organization. There's also a recognition of the meeting that the president had, and as well the South Korean president had with Kim Jong-un, and support for not only the meetings but the documents that came out of that as well. So for all of the hand-wringing, I think, Shep, about the fact that this may harm NATO, this declaration is pretty strong. So we'll wait and we'll see what the communique tomorrow says. But I think on an official basis, things seem to be pretty much on a strong track here. Shep?
John Roberts, live in Brussels. Thank you. Some of these issues we're seeing today have come up before. Continuing coverage on NATO. I mentioned how long that alliance has been around. So some of the issues we're seeing today have come up before. Our national security correspondent, Jennifer Griffin, with that, live at the Pentagon. Hi, Jen.
Hi, Shepard. It's not the first time, as you mentioned, that a U.S. president has urged NATO allies to spend more money. Former President Barack Obama called European nations free riders over their failure to reach the 2% GDP on defense threshold.
Going forward, every NATO member state must step up and carry its share of the burden by showing the political will to invest in our collective defense and by developing the capabilities to serve as a source of international peace and security.
U.S. attempts to pressure NATO countries to contribute more go all the way back to 1984, when Democratic Senator Sam Nunn sponsored an amendment to the defense bill to remove 1/3 of all U.S. troops in Europe by 1990 if NATO members did not increase their military contributions. He was encouraged to do so by NATO leaders who wanted to increase defense spending but were facing domestic pressure to make cuts. Ultimately, Nunn's amendment was rejected in Congress, but it made the intended point. This year, 8 NATO nations are expected to meet the 2% benchmark. They are Britain, Estonia, Greece, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Romania, and the United States. That's up from just 3 countries in 2014. Right now, there are 5 nations hitting the 2% mark, according to new numbers released by NATO yesterday. 21 others fell short. Remember, many European nations have been under pressure since the 2008 global recession. To cut budgets and defense is the easiest area to cut. The push for austerity, in fact, has prevented many from meeting that goal. And in fact, that is one of the reasons that European countries have decreased their defense budgets, and it's hard for them to increase them overnight. That's why the Obama-era agreement in 2014 gave them 10 years to do so. Now, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg has, in fact, taken the lead in pushing NATO to NATO members to meet that 2% amount. He took the helm in 2014. NATO countries, in fact, Shep, spent $12 billion more last year than the year before under Jens Stoltenberg's leadership. Shepard?
Jennifer Griffin at the Pentagon, thank you. Let's turn to John Bussey now, Fox News contributor, associate editor at our corporate cousin, the Wall Street Journal, currently working in Spain, a NATO country, and joins us from Madrid, the capital. John, your thoughts on today's developments?
Shep, you know, the comments you made earlier in the broadcast are very much now reflected in the media here in Europe, on television and in newspapers and on radio. People are discussing the points that you made, which is that NATO has played this critical role, not just for Europe, in staving off additional possible conflict with Russia, with the Soviet Union, but also within NATO, but also for the United States, that it has assured security not just for Europe, but for the U.S. And so today's developments have been very closely scrutinized by European leaders and also by the people through the press and media in Europe. But it's taken in a much bigger sense, in a broader context. They're looking at the attacks on NATO. As John Roberts said earlier in the broadcast, the stampede, the desire to get NATO to spend more, you know, to President Trump's credit, the desire is to have a stronger NATO, but they're looking at it from the standpoint of attacks on EU, on the Iran deal, on the Paris climate deal. They're wondering if President Trump really wants to unravel the sort of the rules-based international system. That's the bigger concern here in Europe.
John Bussey, thank you. And if he does want to unravel it, why? We're also watching a lot of action here at home. The president's pick for the Supreme Court, meeting more of the senators who will determine his fate. Some Democrats hitting hard with criticism of Judge Brett Kavanaugh, while Republicans accuse them of playing politics. Plus, it brings death from the sky. The U.S. military's Reaper drone can fly high above targets and hit them with Hellfire missiles they never see coming. America's enemies might for information on the Reaper, and a hacker is accused of trying to sell them some. Stolen military documents with information about combat drones. That's according to the reporting of the Wall Street Journal. Its parent company and Fox News parent company share common ownership. The Journal reports that the hacker tried to sell maintenance documents on the MQ-9 Reaper drone. It looks like this one. The military uses Reapers, attacks, recon, and surveillance operations, or uses Reapers in those operations. Pentagon officials responded to the report saying the hacker did not take any secret documents and that it was all information that somebody could already find online. They say the Air Force is currently investigating. The Supreme Court nominee, Brett Kavanaugh, back on Capitol Hill today, meeting with some senators who will vote on his confirmation. First up, the Utah Republican Orrin Hatch. He says he has every confidence that Judge Kavanaugh will be confirmed. Then, the South Carolina Republican Lindsey Graham, who calls Judge Kavanaugh a good, solid, conservative judge. In between those meetings, some Senate Democrats held a news conference blasting Judge Kavanaugh's record on health care. The minority leader, Chuck Schumer, says senators have a moral obligation to stop this nominee. The Fox Business Network senior correspondent Adam Shapiro, live on Capitol Hill. Hi, Adam.
Hey, Shep. It's been an interesting day for Judge Kavanaugh. He is right now, this hour, meeting with the senator from Idaho, Mike Crapo, and then later he's going to meet with Rob Portman from Ohio. But it's Lisa Murkowski from Alaska, as well as the Susan Collins from Maine, the senators who are pro-choice Republicans, who now seem to be warming to Judge Kavanaugh. You've got Lisa Murkowski in an interview pointing out that the potential nominees on the president's list, those who have come out saying that they are opposed to pro-choice abortion rights, that would have been a problem for her. But she said, quote, "We're not dealing with that in regards to Judge Kavanaugh." And it was Susan Collins who said that he considered Roe to be settled precedent in reference to Judge Kavanaugh. And that is my judgment, she said, as well. So I was glad to hear him say that at the time. And she now says she will meet with him privately to confirm he still believes that Roe is settled precedent as far as the law is concerned. It was Orrin Hatch, though, who summed it all up this morning. He is on the Senate Judiciary Committee, who expects this confirmation to go through.
We're very proud to have the judge here with us today. He's already on the second greatest court in the union, and he has handled himself very, very well. And he's a judge with a lot of experience. I expect his confirmation to go well.
Shep, you had mentioned Lindsey Graham. Lindsey Graham said the Democrats who are opposed to this nomination, Lindsey Graham said essentially that if the Democrats want to stop it, they should win some elections. Back to you, Shep.
What are you hearing from Democrats, Adam?
Well, you talked about Chuck Schumer and the Democrats in that press conference they had. They are doubling down on what you might call the message that they're going to try and use to stop the nomination. And the big message for them is shifting from the abortion issue to health care. They are going to be hitting the judge on whether he supports the retention of coverage for pre-existing conditions from Obamacare. Here's what Schumer had to say earlier today about it.
We are going to force Judge Kavanaugh to come clean. Will he protect pre-existing conditions? Will he protect Medicaid? Will he protect Medicare? We're not going to let him hide behind this I'll respect existing law, because we've been burnt too many times.
So, Shep, to sum this up, the Democrats are in a tough spot. They've got to retain 3 of their senators who could very well vote in favor of the confirmation, senators who are in states up for re-election, but in states that are pro-Trump, as well as convince Lisa Murkowski and Susan Collins, the 2 Republican senators, to vote against the nomination. And right now, it doesn't look like they're going to be successful. But still several weeks before the confirmation is official. Back to you.
Adam Shapiro, thank you. The trade war with China threatening to rise to another level, with the White House planning taxes on hundreds of billions of new Chinese imports. The Chinese can't respond in the same way because they don't buy enough from the United States. But that means Beijing could strike back with something else. Plus the blast that killed a firefighter and leveled part of a downtown area. That's in 2 minutes. Retaliate now after the Trump administration announced plans to tax even more Chinese imports, $200 billion worth. And stocks are sliding as a result of all of this. We were down at the beginning of the session, been down all day, slightly off the session lows, down about 194 at the moment, about 0.75%. The NASDAQ and the S&P 500 also on the downside. The Fox Business Network's Christina Partsenevelos is with us to make sense of it all. How are you?
Good, and you?
Good.
And the reason? Tariffs, right?
Yeah, tariffs.
Yeah, of course, we had to talk about that again because a new report has come out saying that the administration is thinking about putting a 10% tariff on $200 billion worth of goods. So that's goods coming into the United States from China. The difference this time around is these goods that are targeted are more like consumer staples. So think tobacco, think fish sticks, think handbags.
Fish sticks.
Yeah, I just thought it was an interesting one.
I love me some fish sticks.
Yeah.
That was once a week as a kid.
I ate them as a child as well.
Yeah.
But that's where we could potentially see some prices go a little bit higher. Like you mentioned before the break, the United States imports more goods from China than China imports from the United States. So how can China retaliate? They're going to go through a few other ways by stopping U.S. companies from expanding over there. We know that Tesla announced not too long ago they want to build a new factory. Walmart, everyone wants to capitalize, especially automakers, on the new electric vehicle market. So they could slow that down. They could slow down the visa process. They could hold your stuff at ports or tell tourism, don't go to the United States or boycott U.S. products.
Traditionally, conservatives have been open, free trade type folks, so concerns about these tariffs coming from the left and the right.
Right. Today, there was a vote in the Senate right now, and they discussed these tariffs more specifically towards steel and aluminum. And you had two. You had Senator Chuck Grassley, who did speak, as well as Paul Ryan. Listen to their reaction.
I'm very, very nervous about it, and my constituents are very, very nervous about it. And it doesn't just affect the 5% of the people in Iowa that operate farms, it ripples through the whole economy.
That is important to point out, that China does steal intellectual property. They do engage in unfair trade practices, which violate not just the spirit but the letter of the WTO standards that they agreed to play by years ago. So I think we're right to point that out. I just don't think tariffs are the right mechanism to do that.
All of this is to stop China from stealing IP. The problem is nobody's really providing a solution. They're saying that tariffs are bad, and yes, we're seeing it affect markets and could potentially lead to higher prices. But then what else are we supposed to do as a country? Maybe work with allies, but those allies are kind of upset with us now.
Yep, on the sidelines now. Christina Partsenevelos, thank you.
Thank you.
Apple's self-driving car project is facing some problems of its own. The feds say a former Apple engineer admitted that he stole information from the company and then quit. They arrested the man in California this weekend. He was about to get on a flight to China, as it turns out. Court documents show he first told Apple that he was moving back to China because his mother was sick, but he later admitted he planned to work for a Chinese electric car company. Company reps at Apple deny that they ever received any sensitive, or I should say, at the company for which he was going to work, deny that they ever received any sensitive information. Just days before President Trump is scheduled to come face-to-face with the Russian leader Vladimir Putin, Israel Prime Minister has made his way to Moscow. The Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu sat down with President Putin. The big focus, Syria, where the United States has been in the middle of a proxy war with Russia for years. Our chief correspondent Jonathan Hunt at the Sea of Galilee and just a few miles from Israel's border with Syria. Jonathan, what came out of this meeting?
Well, as of now, Shep, not a great deal. What Prime Minister Netanyahu has been asking of President Putin is that he use his not inconsiderable power inside Syria to persuade Iran to withdraw its forces from the country. But as of the end of this meeting, it seems the best that Prime Minister Netanyahu has been able to get is a relatively vague commitment from President Putin to try to help keep those Iranian forces away from Israel's border with Syria. There is a school of thought here in Israel that the Russians might be willing to do a lot more in terms of pressuring Iran if, in return, the U.S. led the way in lifting sanctions currently imposed on Syria as a result of its invasion of Crimea. So it may be no coincidence, Shep, that this meeting between Putin and Netanyahu took place just days before Putin, of course, meets President Trump. Meanwhile, here in Israel today, a stark demonstration of the tensions along the Israeli-Syrian border. Israeli forces firing a Patriot missile and taking down an unmanned aircraft that Israel says was launched by the Syrian armed forces from inside Syria and crossed the border about 6 miles into Israel and was eventually shot down by that Patriot in the skies right above where we are standing on the southern shores of the Sea of Galilee. Israel has said, of course, that it will defend its borders in any way that it feels necessary. Today, it did just that, and there is still the possibility, Shep, of some sort of retaliatory strike by Israel against Syrian forces as a result of this drone being flown over Israeli territory earlier today. Shep?
Jonathan Hunt live at the Sea of Galilee. A convicted killer says he wants to and willing to die will now have to wait a little longer for his execution because a judge in Nevada says the state cannot use a combination of drugs to kill him. They include fentanyl, one of the drugs at this really the center of the opioid epidemic. But that's not the drug that's causing the delay. Trace Gallagher with the rest of the news from our West Coast News Hub. Trace?
Shep, yeah, the use of the opioid fentanyl and the paralytic drug were not at issue. It was a sedative called midazolam, which Alvogen, the company that makes midazolam, sued Nevada, accusing the state of getting the drug surreptitiously. The drug company argued in court that it's in the business of making life-preserving medication and drugs, not the opposite, saying, quoting here, the type of reputational and goodwill harm being purposed here is very serious for a business, particularly a pharmaceutical company whose entire purpose is to create and market and sell products that are designed to enhance and prolong people's lives. The company also says it does not sell to prison systems and departments of correction and is making sure its distributors also don't sell to prisons. Alvogen says this has nothing to do with the merits of the death penalty. This is strictly a business decision. And for now, Judge Elizabeth Gonzalez agreed, halting the execution, and the hearing date, the next hearing date, is September 10th. Shep.
What was the argument from state officials, Trace?
Well, the Assistant Solicitor General's primary argument was that the judge really didn't have the authority to halt the execution. That's up to the governor. And that Scott Dozier, who was convicted of 2 murders, has already said he wants to die and has said goodbye to his family. In fact, here's Dozier's ex-wife talking about that. Watch.
All of us have, my daughters, myself, and he says, I just don't want other people to suffer anymore over this experience that I'm going through.
The state also asked the judge to consider what Scott Dozier did to his victims and their families and how halting the execution will do nothing but prolong their agony. Dozier was sentenced to die in 2007 for the 2002 murder and robbery of Jeremiah Miller, whose body was later found dumped just off the Las Vegas Strip. Shep.
Trace Gallagher live in Los Angeles. We're getting our first look at the soccer players after their rescue from a flooded cave in Thailand. They were stuck there for more than 2 weeks. You can see them in their hospital beds here. Officials say the players are all strong in mind and heart right now. A U.S. Air Force rescuer who helped with the efforts described the team and their coach as incredibly resilient and talked about how they beat the odds.
I think the world just needs to know that what was accomplished was a once-in-a-lifetime rescue that I think has never been done. We were extremely fortunate that the outcome was the way it was.
We're now getting video of the Thai Navy SEALs carrying one player on a stretcher right through that cave. Our Jeff Paul is live in Chiang Rai in Thailand. Jeff?
Well, Shep, the boys and their coach are all different stages of recovery right now at the hospital, but judging by some of that video we just watched, they all appear to be in pretty good spirits. The main concerns right now for them are nutrition and hydration. They've all lost weight. They also want to make sure they haven't contracted any soil, water, or animal-based illnesses. Doctors say so far they're not showing any signs. We're also learning parents of the boys are finally getting a chance to see their kids. For some, it's through the glass, but for others, it's in the room 2 meters away, but in a sterilized suit. And it's not just the parents who are thinking about the boys. Kids and adults at one of the schools some of the boys attend cannot wait for their return. Take a listen.
I am so happy that all the students and the coach were rescued and came out of the cave.
Yes, I have lots of feelings. Glad, happy, excited, so delighted. Everyone is relieved.
Now, officials say it was because of this international cooperation that made this impossible mission possible. They also want folks to remember that retired Thai Navy SEAL who died during this rescue mission in the days leading up to it, saying that he is a true hero. Shep?
Hey, what's next for the guys, Jeff?
Well, they'll probably spend the next 7 to 10 days in the hospital, but then after that, when they go home, the doctors will be making visits at their houses for about the next month. Hopefully then after that, they can get back onto the soccer field doing what they love to do. And I don't know about you, Shep, but I would not want to be the first team that plays the Wild Boars in the next soccer match after all that they've gone through.
I hear you. Jeff Paul live over there. Thank you. George Clooney's condition. An update after this.